He thought the badge gave him power, authority, control. For years it did. He wore it like armor, a shiny shield that seemed to protect him from consequences. People feared him, respected him, and most of all, they stayed out of his way. And he liked it that way. He walked into rooms with a swagger that said, "I run this." And to be fair, he did. At least, that's what he believed. Because when you spend long enough being the one in charge, when no one questions your choices, and when you get used to bending the rules, sometimes you forget that even you have a line that shouldn't be crossed. But this story isn't just about a badge. It's about the man who wore it, and the woman who refused to be intimidated by it. She didn't look like trouble, not at first. In fact, she looked like someone who kept to herself, someone who didn't want to be seen. Quiet, observant. The kind of person who walks into a room and scans every face without saying a word. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly see, was that she'd spent her whole life standing up to people like him. People who thought a uniform gave them permission to do anything they wanted. People who believed fear was the same thing as respect. Their paths crossed by accident. At least that's how it seemed. Just another day, just another face in the courtroom. He'd done this 100 times before. Run the script, throw around some legal terms, put on a performance that always ended with him on top. That badge didn't just sit on his chest. It lived in his tone, in his eyes, in the way he looked at people like they were beneath him. But this time was different, because this woman wasn't like the others. She didn't flinch when he raised his voice. She didn't look away when he tried to intimidate her. She sat there, calm and steady, with a look in her eyes that said, "I see right through you, asterisk." And in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, uncertain. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a politician. She didn't have a fancy title or powerful connections. But what she did have was a story, a truth, and she had nothing to lose by telling it. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of silence that hums with tension. People shifted in their seats, unsure of what was about to happen, but somehow knowing it was something they wouldn't forget. And when she stood up to speak, you could feel the energy in the room shift. Calm, direct, and unshaken. She didn't come there to fight. She came to reveal. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way movies often are. There were no yelling matches, no explosive confrontations. Just a woman telling the truth in a way that made it impossible to ignore. She spoke of things hidden behind closed doors, of power used to silence rather than serve, of a man who had forgotten what justice was really supposed to mean. And he started to unravel. Because the thing about power is, it only works when people believe in it. And the moment someone stands up and says, "No more," the whole illusion starts to crack. You could see it in his face, the shift from confidence to confusion, from control to panic. Every word she spoke chipped away at the version of himself he had worked so hard to protect. And suddenly, that badge didn't seem so heavy. It looked more like a mask, a cover, a lie. But the real twist, she wasn't there for revenge. She wasn't trying to destroy him. She just wanted the truth to matter again. And maybe, deep down, that's what scared him the most. That someone like her could walk into his world and remind everyone that no one, not even the man with the badge, is above accountability. This wasn't the outcome he expected, and it definitely wasn't the one he was prepared for. But once the truth is out, you can't take it back. The courtroom, once his stage, had become her platform. And the people listening, they weren't just hearing her story, they were starting to question his. Because what happens when the one who's supposed to protect turns out to be the one people need protection from? He thought he could silence her. He thought dragging her into court would shut her down, intimidate her, remind her of who holds the power. But he brought the wrong woman to court, and she was just getting started. He hadn't expected her to fight back. Not like this. Not so calm, so careful, so unshakable. He thought dragging her into that courtroom would be the end of it. A scare tactic. A show of force. He used the system like this before, just enough pressure to make people back down. Most did. They didn't have the energy or the resources to keep going. But she didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She met him at every step, not with anger or outbursts, but with something far more dangerous: facts. He sat at that table, trying to keep the usual smug look on his face, but inside, something had shifted. He could feel it. The confidence he always carried into a courtroom felt thinner this time, stretched tight like a wire about to snap. He watched her speak, watched the way people leaned in to listen. The judge, the gallery, even his own team. It was subtle, but he noticed it, that shift in the room. People weren't looking at him the same anymore. She wasn't just telling her story. She was peeling back layers. Slowly, carefully. She didn't attack, she revealed. Patterns, details, dates. It wasn't just a single complaint anymore. It was a trail, a history. Little cracks in the wall he had built so carefully. And every time she spoke, those cracks got a little wider. He tried to keep control, jumping in with objections, trying to derail her momentum. But she didn't lose focus. It was like she prepared for this moment her whole life. Like every time someone tried to silence her, it only made her voice stronger. And now, standing there in that courtroom, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been pushed aside, dismissed, or made to feel powerless by someone who thought a badge was a free pass. The media had started to notice. A few reporters sat in the back of the courtroom, scribbling notes. Cameras waited outside. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was becoming a story. And he hated that. He hated that he wasn't the one telling it. That for once, he couldn't control the narrative. People started whispering in the hallways. Quiet conversations turned into curious questions. Some of his colleagues, people who used to back him up without hesitation, began to keep their distance. Not openly, not yet, but it was enough to rattle him. He could see it in their eyes. Doubt, and that more than anything scared him. Because once doubt creeps in, it spreads. He tried to strike back, filed extra paperwork, called in favors, sent warnings through the usual channels, anything to shake her, but she kept coming. Every time she stood up in that courtroom, she was stronger than the last. And every time he watched her, a part of him knew he was losing. She'd brought evidence, not just words, emails, logs, testimonies, some from people he never thought would speak. People who had stayed quiet for years, until now. One by one, they started to come forward. Not in waves, but in steady drops, enough to make people start paying attention. Enough to make his defense look shaky. He sat alone in his office one night, staring at the glowing computer screen, rereading everything that had been said. Every word, every sentence, every carefully documented line. He thought about calling someone, anyone, but who would still answer? Who would stick their neck out for him now? The trial was nearing its peak. The tension in the courtroom felt thick, like the air before a storm. The gallery was fuller now. People showed up early just to get a seat. Everyone sensed that something big was about to happen. They didn't know what, not yet, but they could feel it. He walked in that morning, shoulders a little stiffer, jaw a little tighter. Gone was the usual smirk. He scanned the room and saw her already seated, calm as ever, hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't even look his way, and that somehow cut deeper than words ever could. When the judge called the session to order, the silence that followed was electric. No one coughed. No one moved. She stood, ready to speak again. And he braced himself. Because he knew this was it. The moment everything came to a head. The moment where the lies, the arrogance, the shield of the badge, everything he thought would protect him, was about to be put to the test. And as she stepped forward, with the eyes of the court locked on her, he realized something he'd never admitted before. He was afraid. But the story wasn't over yet. Not even close. She stood there for a long moment before speaking. The room was still. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, waiting. And when she finally began, her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to be loud. It was steady, clear, and full of truth. She didn't just talk about him. She talked about the system. The way it allowed people like him to hide behind a badge. To manipulate the rules. To get away with things others never could. She spoke about the fear that kept people quiet, the pressure to look the other way, and the cost of silence. But most of all, she talked about courage. The courage it took to stand up, not just for herself, but for others who never got the chance. He sat there, his hands folded tightly in front of him, jaw clenched. The confidence was gone now. So was the swagger. And as she went on, you could see it, the realization that the badge couldn't protect him anymore. Not from this, not from the truth. By the time she finished, the courtroom felt different. Heavy, but also lighter. Like something had finally been named, out loud, in front of everyone. She sat down without looking at him, and the silence that followed said everything. The judge spoke next. Calm but firm. He acknowledged the weight of what had been brought forward. There was no dramatic gavel slam, no shouting, just words. But they hit hard. Because this time, accountability wasn't just a word. It was happening in real time. And just like that, the man who thought he was untouchable wasn't. He was removed from his position pending investigation. His past cases were reviewed. Some were reopened. Whispers turned into headlines. The courtroom became a symbol, not just of justice, but of change. And people paid attention. She didn't celebrate. There were no victory speeches, no spotlight moments. After the final day in court, she quietly walked out of the building, past the reporters, past the flashing cameras, and disappeared into the city like she had come, calm and composed. But her story didn't end there. Others started coming forward, stories that had been locked away for years. Not just about him, but about the culture that allowed it. The power of one voice had given others permission to speak. And soon, there wasn't just one story anymore. There was a wave of them. A shift. She was invited to speak at events, share her journey, and mentor people who had gone through similar things. Not because she wanted fame, but because she understood how hard it was to stand alone. And now she made sure others wouldn't have to. As for him, he faded into the background. There were no public apologies, no real explanations. But maybe that was part of the point. The silence that once protected him now kept him isolated. The badge he once flashed so confidently no longer opened doors. It only reminded people of what had been uncovered. And the system, slowly but noticeably, started to change. New policies were introduced, more transparency. A few people who had once stayed silent began asking questions. Not everything was fixed, but something had started. Something real. It all began because one woman decided not to back down. She wasn't louder than him. She wasn't more powerful. But she had the one thing he never expected: truth. And when truth walks into a room, even the strongest badge can't stop it. So what's the takeaway? Sometimes the people who seem the most powerful are only protected by fear and silence. And the second someone brave enough speaks up, the illusion begins to fall apart. It's not always dramatic. It's not always fast. But it's real. And it matters. He thought his badge made him untouchable. But he brought the wrong woman to court. And that changed everything.